It was meant to be one of my final deliveries of the night. I was working at a pizzeria called Leonardo's, with Frank, one of my bosses, handling the night shift alongside me. He was in charge of assigning deliveries, and when an order came in for a couple of regular pizzas, he handed me a slip of paper with the address and phone number. This happened back in 2009. I didn't have a GPS-equipped cell phone, just a basic flip phone, and I didn't own a Garmin GPS either. Instead, I had to rely on an old-school map book to navigate during my deliveries. The street I was supposed to find was called something like Willows Road. I can't recall the house number or the name given with the order, but I vividly remember the struggle I had locating the place. The area was incredibly rural, surrounded by nothing but woods and farmland, with more woods stretching endlessly beyond that. The absence of streetlights only made things more difficult. I had to pull over multiple times, turning on my car's interior lights to check the map again. The situation was nerve-wracking as I drove down this silent, dark, and confusing road. Eventually, I decided to call the number on the paper Frank had given me. The phone rang several times, and just when I thought no one would pick up, someone finally did. But instead of a greeting, there was silence. I hesitated before saying hello, and the voice on the other end echoed it back. It was a low, deep voice, soft but unsettling. I introduced myself as the pizza guy, explaining that I was having trouble finding the place. He responded in a slow, monotonous tone, describing his driveway as easy to miss, just a dirt trail. His directions were clear enough, and I eventually found it. I turned onto this narrow, barely noticeable dirt path, driving slowly and cautiously for about 30 seconds before a small, one-story house came into view. There was a faint orange glow from inside, visible through one of the windows. I parked next to an old, run-down pickup truck, the only other vehicle in sight, grabbed the pizzas, and walked to the front door. I searched for a doorbell but didn't find one, so I knocked. I could hear muffled music from inside, followed by footsteps approaching the door. The door cracked open slightly after a few moments, revealing just a sliver of someone's face, only one eye peeking out at me. Nervously, I asked, "You ordered the pizza, right?" The person replied, "Oh, yes, the pizza," and I recognized the voice from our earlier call. There was an awkward pause. Unsure of what else to say, I asked, "Do you have the cash?" He responded, "Yes, let me go get it," before stepping away from the door. I heard his footsteps move into another room as the old music, something from the 1930s, played on, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Then, the door began to slowly inch open on its own, revealing more of the dimly lit interior. Everything inside seemed ancient, the furniture looked like it was from another era, and there were metal sheets on the floor, likely covering holes. The music was coming from a vintage record player, the kind with a big horn on top. But the most disturbing thing was the smell. It reeked of death. I waited, trying to be patient as the man fetched the money. But as time passed, I began to feel increasingly uneasy. I knocked on the door again, peering inside, and called out, "Sir?" His voice came from another room, asking, "Would you mind coming into the kitchen, please?" My coworkers and bosses always advised against entering anyone's home unless absolutely necessary. This seemed like one of those situations where that advice was crucial. I asked him to repeat himself, and he did. "Can you come to the kitchen, please?" Reluctantly, I stepped inside, the old floor creaking under my feet. The house was very linear, and to my right, I saw the entrance to the kitchen where his voice was coming from. To the left, a narrow hallway stretched out, lined with doors on one side. At the end of the hallway, a man was slowly dancing, his back to me. But it wasn't just any kind of dancing, it was a strange, unsettling movement as he felt his own body in a way that was deeply disturbing. I was already on edge, but this made me downright uncomfortable. I turned back toward the kitchen, still holding the pizzas, and noticed the man peeking around the edge of the wall, just one eye visible again. At that moment, I thought, what on earth is going on here? I asked again if he had the cash. The man didn't respond. Instead, he began to laugh, a deep, soft sound that was more of a subtle giggle. Then, he suddenly called out, "Randall," in a loud, commanding voice, completely different from the monotone he'd used before. That was the breaking point for me. I turned and headed for the front door, but as I glanced down the hallway, the dancing man was now just standing there, staring at me. I quickly left the house, shutting the door behind me, and rushed back to my car, still holding the pizzas. I threw them onto the passenger seat and got in the car as fast as I could. As I backed up to clear the pickup truck, I looked back at the house and saw that the door was fully open again. My heart pounded at the thought that one of them might be outside, trying to get into my car. Maybe they were, but I didn't stick around to find out. I managed to get back down the dirt driveway and onto the road. I drove straight back to the pizzeria and called Frank to explain what had happened. He wasn't upset. In fact, when I got back, everyone found the situation funny. I can understand how it might sound amusing when told later, but in the moment, it was anything but. Whatever was happening in that house was far from normal, and I'm convinced they had no intention of buying pizza. I've had nightmares since, seeing that man's face peeking from behind a wall. After that night, I stopped stepping inside anyone's house or apartment during deliveries. I'm currently 20 years old, but when this incident happened, I was 19. I live in Newark, Delaware, a usually calm and quiet town, until college season starts in the fall and spring. Newark is home to the University of Delaware, a well-known and respected school in the U.S. It also has a reputation as a big party school, so when the students return, the town becomes much more lively. I work as a bicycle delivery driver for Jimmy John's, a job I still have as I share this story. The event took place on a Tuesday or Wednesday night in the spring, either late April or early May. I can't quite remember. My shift was the usual one, from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. Jimmy John's stays open until 2 a.m. on weekdays and 3 a.m. on weekends, making us one of the few places still open aside from the bars. Naturally, we get a lot of drunk college students rushing in to place orders, which makes things pretty chaotic. The deliveries can be overwhelming, but they also mean good tips, so I put up with it. This particular night was the last shift of the week, and just as 2 a.m. was approaching, one final delivery came in, and I was next in line to take it. I was frustrated since I just wanted to finish my shift and go home to sleep before my early class the next morning, but the idea of one last tip pushed me forward. I grabbed the order, got the address from my boss, and then hopped on my bike, put in my earbuds, and headed to the destination, which was an off-campus house instead of a dorm. The ride took about 10 minutes, and the temperature was dropping, so I was eager to get it over with. When I arrived, I parked my bike in the driveway near the front door, which was faintly illuminated by a dim, warm light. I rang the doorbell, taking one earbud out to listen for any sounds from inside. As I stood there, I began to wonder why someone would order food this late, especially when it seemed like all the lights were off inside. After a few moments of silence, I rang the bell again, and soon I heard heavy footsteps approaching the door. When the footsteps finally reached the door, I could hear the doorknob turning. I looked up as the door cracked open, and all I could see was a single eye peering through the gap. I always find it awkward when people do this. I never know how to respond. I just smiled and said, "Hello," and told him how much he owed. The door opened slightly more, and a hand emerged, holding an envelope. The envelope dropped to the floor, and the door closed again. I stood there for a moment, puzzled by the whole situation, before finally picking up the envelope to inspect it. There was something inside, so I opened it. The moment I opened the envelope, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't cash. Inside was a torn piece of paper with a large red X drawn in the center. Instantly, I heard those heavy footsteps again, this time closer. Panic surged through me, and I turned and bolted down the driveway towards my bike, which I hadn't even locked up. I felt a terrifying sensation that someone was right behind me, and I didn't dare look back. I jumped on my bike and pedaled as fast as I could, my only thought being to get back to the store. I made it back to Jimmy John's in under 5 minutes, where my boss noticed how shaken I was and asked what happened. I told him everything, and he gave me the rest of the night off. When I got home, I double-locked the doors and checked all the windows before finally trying to sleep, though it took a long time to calm down. The next day, I shared the story with everyone at work, and they were just as disturbed as I was. After that, my boss allowed me to decline any late-night deliveries that seemed suspicious, and I never took another order to that house again. Even now, I can't help but wonder what that person's true intentions were, and I always find myself looking over my shoulder at night. I'm 29 now, but this unsettling experience occurred when I was 21. My girlfriend, whom I've been with since we were both 18 and who is also 29 now, joined me and a group of her friends for a trip to Arizona. We rented an Airbnb and spent our days exploring various sites. Ever since I was a kid, I've had a strong fascination with the paranormal, a passion that still lingers today. So, while we were in Arizona, I convinced everyone to visit Jerome, an abandoned ghost town said to be a hotbed of supernatural phenomena. It was our last day in Arizona, and they agreed to go along with the idea. The drive took about 2 hours from where we were staying, and the town was exactly what I imagined, an eerie, isolated place clinging to the side of a mountain, with only a handful of residents. Most of the buildings were in ruins, and no trespassing signs were everywhere. Naturally, we chose to ignore those warnings and ventured into the town. The place was steeped in history, much of it grim and disturbing. After wandering around for roughly 30 minutes, we decided to enter one of the abandoned structures, which had once been a hotel. The building was in shambles, the floors groaned with every step, and the walls were covered in graffiti. While our friends were busy snapping photos and recording videos, my girlfriend and I pushed further into the decaying interior. Inside, the hotel was dark and uncomfortably cold, as if the temperature had dropped sharply the moment we stepped in. The stillness was unsettling. The only sounds were our own footsteps and the occasional creak of old wood beneath our feet. As we reached what appeared to be the lobby, an unexpected noise froze us in place, footsteps, but not our own. They were coming from the floor above. We exchanged a nervous glance, both realizing we weren't alone. I was curious and wanted to investigate, but my girlfriend was too shaken, so we decided to leave. We quickly rejoined her friends and shared what we had heard. They were skeptical, thinking we were playing a prank, but I could see they were on edge. We all agreed it was time to leave the town. During the drive back to the Airbnb, my girlfriend and I kept trying to rationalize what we'd heard, but nothing seemed to add up. That night, while we were attempting to sleep, strange noises continued to disturb us. It sounded like someone was pacing in the hallway outside our room. Each time I got up to check, I found nothing, no one was there. This happened repeatedly throughout the night, making it impossible for any of us to sleep. We were all too spooked, still unnerved by what we'd encountered in that decrepit hotel. We left Arizona the following day, and since then, my girlfriend and I haven't spoken a word about what happened in Jerome. It remains one of the most unnerving experiences of my life, something that has left a lasting mark on me.